Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Yes. I feel like I've seen dozens of uh tunnel, railway, bridge, London videos, but I can't help it. Preemptive like. I like engineering videos. Let's go, guys. My name's Connor. If you're new, hello. I like to watch things and learn stuff with you guys. Let's go.
Deep beneath London, you'll find this £19 billion new railway. It's 42 kilometres.
That's pretty heavy. All right, guys, get it? Sorry.
Find this £19 billion new railway. It's 42 kilometres of new tunnels have been carved out in between the foundations, services and other tube lines that all sit below what is one of the world's most historic cities.
But when it starts to open later in 2022, there'll be one station missing: Bond Street. The delays and cost overruns impacting what will be London's new Elizabeth line are well reported. The project's now almost 4 years late and nearly £3 billion over budget. It had issues long before the pandemic, but when COVID came along, it didn't exactly do much to help things. For more than a decade, teams right across this vast rail project have battled to build new stations and tunnels beneath one of the world's biggest cities. So what was it that made Bond Street so particularly challenging? And why is this now the only station on the line that won't open with the rest of it? Back in 2007, the idea for a new commuter rail service across London seemed like a good one. The Crossrail project was set up to build the Elizabeth line. A budget of £14.8 billion was agreed, and works began in 2009. With London's population growing, this railway is out to better connect the suburbs with the city centre. The line runs for 100 kilometres from Reading way out here in the west, beneath the very heart of the city, and over to Abbeywood and Shenfield in the east. It'll service more than 40 stations, including 10 new ones built from scratch. It might all sound like a lot of work, but the project is expected to add £42 billion to the UK's economy. It'll also help to ease London's housing crisis by spurring the development of some 200,000 new homes along its route and creating better connections so commuters could live out of the city. The new railway...
One of the biggest things I came to appreciate, when you grow up in more spread out suburbs and then you go into the city for college or something, there are a lot of great things in the city, like for instance, like 24-hour rest, like places where I can get food. Oh, I'd almost take that over the space. I don't know actually, but just having room, like between, just having space, I guess, is something that you just don't appreciate until you go inside a city.
And creating better connections so commuters could live out of the city.
That's how I felt, at least.
The new railway will even plug into HS2, that also long-delayed high-speed rail link between London and the Midlands. Without the Elizabeth line, the projected rise in passenger numbers onto the underground network could force station closures due to overcrowding.
Now, fast forward from 2009 to today, 2022, and the railway's in passenger trials and just about to open. Its 2018 completion date has slipped by 3.5 years, and the budget's grown to £19 billion.
Despite the remarkable feats of engineering involved, it's not exactly a great advert for the construction industry, and the poster boy of that bad ad is Bond Street Station. Reports of setbacks here go back as far as 2014, when delays in tunnelling, which is always unpredictable, began to have a knock-on effect on the rest of the schedule. The plan was to first dig the train tunnels, and then working from the street level downwards, create a station box which would break through to the tunnels. But not long after construction began, it became obvious that tunnelling Bond Street Station would be even more complicated than predicted.
People are so smart.
To try and understand this in some more detail, I caught up with Crossrail CEO Mark Wilde.
There was a particularly large geological fault found there, and that taken a lot of engineering time for the civil engineers to work out. The piles are particularly deep at Bond Street. I think there are some piles at Bond Street that are nearly down to the chalk aquifer. They are really deep. So there was a geological problem at Bond Street that had to be overcome. But the fundamentals of it were Bond Street was the mustering point where the tunnel boring machines were largely recovered from. So Bond Street had to really wait for the tunneling to be completed before a lot of the tunnel boring machine equipment was pulled out in and around that area.
Conditions up at street level didn't exactly help. Bond Street
It seems like that's the worst place they could have picked to bring out the machinery. I know hindsight is 2020, but yeah, not
In and around
ideal.
that area.
Conditions up at street level didn't exactly help. Bond Street Station sits in the middle of Mayfair, an ultra-exclusive area that boasts luxury hotels, shops, and heavy traffic. It's home to some of the most expensive real estate in the world, and that leaves very little room for street-level access. For large stretches of the project, the only access to the site was through two 9-metre access holes. These proved too small to deliver the heavy machinery and steelwork needed below ground level. Instead, engineering trains brought them directly to the station, sharing the already busy tracks with other traffic. Extra work was also needed to comply with updated fire safety standards in the wake of London's Grenfell Tower tragedy. There were concerns that fire might spread unseen behind the concrete cladding, so it had to be temporarily removed to let construction teams add more fire barriers.
Is that the one where the fire started from like the underneath the escalator? Because like over time the grease that like lubricates the escalator built up or something. Am I thinking of the right one?
March 2020 arrived.
The World Health Organization declared the outbreak an international public health emergency.
We have rang the alarm bell loud and clear.
You must stay at home.
Crossrail quickly imposed a safe stop temporary halt on all construction, and work only resumed around 3 months later on most sites.
But it wasn't that simple at Bond Street. When the pandemic hit, there were almost 800 people a day working down there. Imposing a temporary stop and then getting going again wasn't straightforward, and the station's schedule had to be replanned.
In amongst all that, the main contractors Costain and Skanska, working under a joint venture, were removed from the project, and Crossrail took direct responsibility for finishing the station.
In a funny way, although it cost us about 13 weeks of time, we demobilized the whole of the site, about 7,000 people in 48 hours.
Can we just like give ourselves a round of applause sometimes? This is cool. Like this is really cool. We're just yeah, we might be destroying the planet in some ways, but I mean, we're pretty smart. Look at this.
And then we rebuilt our resources back over 13 weeks with safe procedures. Interestingly, when we remobilized, our productivity was much higher. Bond Street, different kettle of fish, I'm afraid. When the pandemic occurred, we had 800 people at Bond Street, and as you say, a very confined space. So there was just no way of remobilizing Bond Street in 13 weeks. So if there's too many people inside, it was too dense, working 2 meters apart from each other, wearing masks. Bond Street was the site that we had to completely reschedule.
Putting those dark, socially distanced days behind us, efforts to finish the station are paying off. Bond Street is now estimated to be a mere 3 months behind schedule.
I guess two things, a really good job done by the new team in the post-pandemic era. They've greatly increased their productivity. Typically you get 70-80% productivity now at Bond Street. And to be fair to all the other stations, the fact that we finished the route where we finished the railway, the signalling people don't need to be in the tunnel ventilation system, means that the station people can just focus on it.
There's a lot to be excited about when the station does open. Advanced acoustic dampers should make it sound calm even when packed with commuters. The ticket hall's been given the Mayfair treatment with brass finishings. And of course there's the main benefit of having another interchange in central London.
Bond Street Station will be one of the jewels in the crown, no doubt.
The initial fears about long-term working from home trends don't seem to have come true. In fact, industries like banking and insurance are signalling a full return to the office, and the wider underground's been getting busier in recent weeks. When Bond Street Station does finally open, it'll be at an uncertain time for the tube network. Transport for London's finances are in bad shape after 2 years of pandemic disruption. And while passenger numbers look set to rise in the long run, journeys are currently 30% down on pre-COVID levels, impacting revenues.
It's no secret that Crossrail has had its challenges. Many people will look at this project and say, look, we've built tube lines under London before. How was the planning of this so underestimated to the extent that it caused a delay and cost overrun that it did.
It sounds unfair to ask, but that is a question I have. I mean, I'm no good at tunnel building, but it's like it seems like a sort of part of it was I could know nothing about it. It seems like calling that a bad area to assign to take equipment out wasn't very smart. What do I know?
Crossrail's an interesting project in the fact it's not really a new tube line. It's big suburban trains going underneath London, linking the Great Western and the Great Eastern together. So it's more than just a tube line. Also, if you think of the historical context, London's tube lines were pretty much finished by 1905. And the Vic came along in the 60s. Then we extended the Jubilee in kind of the late 90s. So this is a genuine once in a generation engineering achievement. There's no doubt that we had a lot of trouble on this program 2017, 2018. You know, we were over budget by about 25% and we're about 3 years later than the baseline. So there's no use hiding away from that. But I think part of the reason for that was just the immense complexity and scale of this project has never actually been done before. Now, that's not an excuse. It's just a reason why it was greatly underestimated. Pretty much between 2016 and 2018, we kind of lost the scale of the integration in particular.
I think because London is such a, I've said this many times, it's such a lived-in area of the world, and you know, there's been giant construction projects going on for centuries, that in that small amount of area, making tunnels through that means that you have so much stuff you have to watch out for. And so that alone is, you know, going to make it a lot more difficult.
This project's had its challenges. Regular viewers of the B1M will know that it's not the first infrastructure project in the world to find itself behind schedule and over budget, and it won't be the last. But that'll never detract from its long-term impact, stretching decades into the future, enabling millions of journeys and helping to shape London. In time, the delays at Bond Street and the reasons for them will be forgotten. They'll become part of the fabric of the city. It'll be taken for granted. That for me really underlines the power of construction. Yes, this project was hard. Yes, this team worked hard to turn things around, but the results will echo through time and help to better connect this great city. That's all from me down here on London's new Elizabeth Line, guys. Don't forget, if you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction and you want to see more of me in cool places like this, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.
I am always amazed, and I never want anyone to take granted, just like when I look at, for an example, it's just like telephone poles. They're not the most like, oh, how did you do that sort of thing. It's just like the amount of telephone poles and the amount of telephone lines and crisscrossing. It's just, we are an amazing species. I don't want to pat us on the back too much, but a car is another great example. It's like, step back for a second. I know not one person made the car, okay? But just we as a species took raw materials, just stuff on where's that freaking bus? Just stuff in the earth, okay? Or we made it, you know, into, you know, synthetic materials and, you know, getting everything from the rubber to the steel, and we made it into this, or into a car. That is amazing. And it's, especially being born into it, it's easy to take it for granted. But am I the only one that just has too much time on my hands and I stop and I look at a car? I even did this when I was a little kid. I'm like, we just have these things. Engineering is awesome. I love learning about this sort of stuff, especially tunneling, bridge making, any sort of like big civil engineer projects are super fascinating to me. And I think they should be to everyone. I mean, you live around it. I think we should be a bit appreciative to the workers and the minds that went into this stuff. Really fascinating. Love y'all. Hope you guys are doing well. And I can't wait to see your comments. Any recommendations would really be appreciated. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.